As promised, we're going to talk about those training missions. Joining us now, former Army Black Hawk pilot Bradley Bowman, who is also senior director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for being with us. You've flown this route.
Thank you.
You've done these missions. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so from 2000 to 2002, I was in 12th Aviation Battalion. I served as Charlie Company, 12th Aviation Battalion company commander, and flew these routes too many times to count, including on the night of September 11, 2001 terror attacks. I was on these routes. This is a system. What your viewers may want to know is that this is a system of low-level helicopter routes that goes all around the National Capital Region, in and out of Washington, D.C. Many of the routes are above the major freeways, the Beltway, 395 for those who know the area, as well as above the Potomac. And on a day-to-day basis, literally daily, sometimes multiple times a day, these are used to move senior leaders around the National Capital Region. Basically, in effect, everyone below the president. Marine One flies the president, and this unit would fly everyone else, including members of Congress, senior Pentagon leaders, and others. That's the day-to-day mission, but it's important to understand that this 12th Aviation Battalion also has a continuity of government mission, and it would be safe to assume they have other classified missions that they would need to perform on our nation's worst day. And so when they're flying these missions, yes, they're getting someone to an important briefing or meeting, as important as that is, but they're also rehearsing the very same skills that they employed after the 9/11 terror attacks and would employ again on our nation's worst day.
Do they have to do it in order to get the real-life experience? Do they have to do it by a commercial airport? I understand needing to be familiar with congestion and a bit of chaos because that's what they're training for. But does it have to happen where it can put civilian life at risk?
I respect and empathize with the question. After something this horrific, we have to make sure we learn the lessons and make sure this never happens again. This system that I just described has been in existence for decades. I did it more than 20 years ago, and it's safely deconflicted helicopters and aircraft during that time. There have been a few near misses, and then we had this disaster a couple nights ago. It failed. We have to know why it failed and make sure it didn't happen again. This crew, if it's true, if they were supposed to be at 200 feet, at each place in this system I described, you have to be on a particular route and a particular altitude. It requires precision, right altitude, right route, communication, following directions. If we find that they were above 200 feet, then that would be perhaps a decisive error here that resulted in this. That training, much of it, could be conducted everywhere, but a key principle of military readiness is you want to train the way you're going to fight or train the way you're going to operate. There's a way to build this proficiency and make sure that they're not in that area until they're ready to comply. And so I take your point, and I think there's a way to keep civilian aircraft safe and also meet the national security requirements. And I am confident there'll be some reforms, and there should be some reforms after this.
The Pentagon says the pilots involved were very experienced. One of them had 1,000 flight hours. The other one had 500. That is a lot. It's a lot of flight experience. If they were above 200 feet, they're not supposed to be, but if they were, and if they were off route, would there be any system in place within the helicopter that would alert them to the, just a ping for, hey, by the way, your altitude is a little bit wrong, or hey, we're going to ping it back to air traffic control or whoever's monitoring it at the military. You are not at the right altitude for this mission.
So what you learn on day one of flight school is that you have to have your scanning. You're scanning outside the aircraft for obstacles and aircraft avoiding. You're scanning inside the cockpit looking at your instruments. And so when they're flying through that route, which I've done many times, you're primarily outside the aircraft focus, but you're also quickly doing a scan inside looking at your altitude. And I'll tell you personally, if I saw it at 210, 215, I'd be like, oh, oops, correct quickly. If this aircraft was at 250, 300, 350, that would be quite significant. But you don't want to have a single point of failure, taking the implicit point behind your question. And so the air traffic control should be at least visually monitoring, if not monitoring by other means, the altitude of the aircraft. And if they see a problem, as busy as they are, you would want them to contact the aircraft and say, hey, what are you doing? Adjust your altitude. And so we need to have multiple ways here to avoid a single point of failure. And that can include more vertical buffer. Are we really comfortable with only 200 feet of buffer between the aircraft coming in and these helicopters? And more horizontal buffer. And that maybe means telling some very powerful, influential people in Washington, sorry, you can't have a direct flight from here or there, and maybe telling the helicopters that maybe they need to hold. Many times I was told to slow down, speed up, hold. They can wait, and not every one of these aircraft missions needs to go through that route. They can go somewhere else as long as they're able to do their most important missions on our nation's worst day.
And certainly because it takes years to train up air traffic controllers. One more question to you. Maneuverability here. For a regional jet, there's only so much maneuverability that an aircraft that large has. What about this Black Hawk helicopter? How easy would it have been for the pilot to adjust if they saw that plane dangerously close?
Blackhawks are like a Porsche of the sky. They're incredibly powerful and they're very maneuverable. With 5 seconds, you can do a very significant evasive maneuver. And so, if there wasn't an evasive maneuver there, then they didn't see it. And that raises some larger questions about whether in the communications between the pilots and the ATC, whether there was confusion about what aircraft they should be looking at.
And also an aircraft with those lights, I was told by another pilot yesterday, you can get lost in it. The lights can look very much like the lights on the ground, especially at night. If you were wearing night vision goggles,
yes.
would that also make it more difficult?
Night vision goggles have two primary effects. One is it reduces your peripheral vision and your field of view, which makes that scan I was talking about more important. And it also creates some lighting problems. When I'd go out flying in the middle of nowhere, I didn't like full moon nights or even half moon nights because they were too bright. So I flew that mission without night vision goggles for 2 years, and it was just fine. And if I had them, I probably wouldn't have been wearing them because I would rather have the field of view and not deal with the light issues.
All right. Thank you so much, Bradley Bowman. Really appreciate all of your expertise and the context about what exactly is going on in that corridor.